Hello everyone. Today we are going to go over Intro to Anatomy and Physiology. It should be a complete review of everything that you've already been made aware of, but we're going to go through and check it out, and if you have any questions, we'll discuss it in the next class. So we're going to go ahead and just do a quick overview of some terminology and kind of refresh and dust off the cobwebs. The first thing we want to look at is the term biology. So if you broke this down into prefix and suffix, you have the study of bio having to do with life. So this is the study of life. And just to kind of remind you about what the 5 basic functions of living organisms, if you want to try to see if you can remember this without seeing the next slide, try it now, take a pause on the video. Otherwise, we're going to move on and go over those content items. So the 5 basic functions of all living organisms. 1, we have to be responsive to the environment. So this means that we're adaptable. We can do whatever we need to do to work within our environment. And of course, we have growth. So this not only includes size and number of cells or size, height, everything kind of grows size and number. You can also reproduce, and we also have to talk about movement. And movement can actually be subcategorized into 2 particular categories. You have an internal movement and you have an external movement. So your internal movement is where the best example is to talk about food, because you're digesting food, you're bringing that food through the system. So that's an internal movement, whereas us physically walking through the environment is considered an external movement. And then finally, and probably of those, we talk about metabolism, which brings me to my next question. Which basic function do you have to have in order for the other 4 to work? If you said metabolism, you are absolutely 100% correct. And our metabolism is the creation of energy as the result of adenotriphosphate, or ATP. So those ATP stores break down into ADP, or diphosphate, and the breaking down of that releases energy. So for metabolism to function, our cells require energy in order to function. We get that through the metabolism of nutrients such as oxygen, and all of this is received through respiration. And we need to remember that our cells are going to generate waste products. So they have to be eliminated through excretion. And that's why I have the picture of the toilet here, because every time your cells are doing their daily activities, they're going to generate their waste products, and it has to be eliminated through excretion of the cell, or out of the cell. So when it comes to the other nutrients that our cell needs, this is through digestion, and we are breaking down very complex foods into the simplest forms that are easy for absorption so that our cells can use them in the form of energy. So you may be asking yourself about how these cells are going to receive the energy and the nutrients they need when they are stationary. So how do they get those oxygen and nutrients we have been talking about? This is all going to be through circulation, our cardiopulmonary system. And how do our cells actually communicate with each other? It is actually through our circulation that this happens. The thing that frustrates some providers that are taking class is the fact that the terminology from anatomy and physiology can be so complex and widespread, and we have very simple layman terms that allow us to get through that description. So it can be irritating because you have 5 words that mean the same thing. But let's go through some of this information. So a lot of our terms come from Greek origins. Anatomy, for example, is a study of internal and external structure and the physical relationships between body parts. You also have biology, which we've already mentioned, which is the study of life. And then you have physiology, which is how living organisms actually perform their vital functions. Now, when we talk about anatomical perspectives, there are two ways that you can perceive information. Macroscopic, meaning we can see it visually from it is eye level, we can see it with our eyes, or we can look at it microscopically, which is where you have to have the help of something in order for you to see it because it is so tiny. And unfortunately, nothing is ever simple. We got to subcategorize everything. So when we talk about microscopic anatomical perspectives, we have to break them down even further. So you have both the microscopic, which is cytology, or you could look at it from histology. Now, cytology, cyte meaning cell. So in this case, it's the study of the internal structure of these individual cells. If you hear my dog scratching in the background, my apologies. The other is histology, and this is where you're examining the tissue of the specialized cells and the cell products that work together to perform a particular function. So we're talking about more than one cell type. Then you move into what is referenced as macroscopic anatomy, or what you can see with the naked eye, and this is also sometimes called your gross anatomy. You have three different subcategories. You have surface, regional, and systemic anatomy. So your surface anatomy, you're looking at those superficial markings, you're looking at the form itself, and then with your regional anatomy, you're actually looking at not only the superficial, but also the internal features that are specific to a region of the body. And then you have systemic anatomy. This is the structure of major organ systems, or you could have an examples where you have different organ groups that are working together to create a function. We're going to pop over into physiology now. And physiology is the function of anatomical structures, both physical and chemical processes that are responsible for the characteristics of life. There's your big fancy definition. And unfortunately, physiology, like everything else, gets broken down into smaller categories. So if we were going to box these up, you would have cell physiology, where you're looking at the cells, special physiology, which is looking at specific organs, and an example of this would be your kidneys. System physiology, so that's where you're looking at all aspects of the functions of organ systems, such as respiratory. And then you have pathological physiology, or pathology, which is the study of the effects that disease has on the body. And we have to ask ourselves, why are we going this far? So you want to know if you understand what is considered normal anatomy and physiology for the body, and then you understand how the disease reacts or creates a response, then you're going to be able to better pick out or connect the signs and symptoms to the specific disease pathology. So one of the things that always bothered me with the EMT class, when I went through EMT class, it's probably different now for some of you that have went through, but when I went through EMT class, they said, okay, when you have a stroke, these are the signs and symptoms you need to memorize, and that's going to be the signs of a stroke. Well, if I have nothing tactile to connect it to, if I don't understand why something should be named, then I have a problem trying to memorize that just blindly. So if you have a better understanding of what's normal and then how the disease impacts that, then suddenly understanding or recognizing those signs and symptoms becomes a lot easier. So we look at the human body, and of course our body is made of building blocks. So you have several levels of organization within the human body. You have chemical or molecular, you'll have cellular, tissue, organ system, and organism. We've kind of already hit these, but just rehashing it. Now, when it comes to the chemical or molecular level, that's where we're talking about atoms. These are the smallest, most stable units of matter, and they will combine to form molecules with complex shapes. And then we have our cells, which are our basic building blocks of life. There's approximately 100 trillion cells in your body. They are very specialized, and these cells contain various components that are referred to as organelles. So our organelles found inside the cell have very specific processes that they carry out in order for us to survive, or it's needed for life. Next, we start talking about tissues, and these are similar cells, groups of similar cells that are working together. There's 4 types of tissue. You have epithelial, connective, muscle, and nerve, and we'll get into those a little bit later on. After tissues, we start looking at organs, and these, of course, are composed of different tissues, different tissue types. And then you have an organ system where you have groups of organs that are actually coming together to have a common function and purpose. Now, I have this list here of the organ systems we'll kind of get into as we progress through the next 3 days of online learning. But you have the integumentary, skeletal, muscle, nervous, endocrine, cardiovascular, lymphatic, respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive. So just a quick overhaul on these. You have the integumentary system. This is your skin, your hair, your nails. They're there for protection. They help to regulate temperature, which is why, when we look at our burn victims, why they have such a hard time regulating their temperature. And it's also there to provide us with sensation. The skeletal system, of course, gives us not only support and protection, but it also allows us to move through our environment. And it has those hidden abilities that a lot of people don't think about, where you have both mineral and fat storage as well as the site for blood production. The muscular system provides us with movement. It gives us some posture, or some of us lack posture if we are slouching. And it can give us our heat production, which is so important in certain situations. With the nervous system, we have the control and regulation of and coordination of other systems. And this is the area where when we use our medications, we're manipulating the body system. The easiest is through the nervous system. And we're going to spend some time here because I do want to make sure you guys understand how this all kind of relates and correlates together. But it includes not only sensation, tells us information about the environment, but it also is part and parcel to our memory. We have the endocrine system. So if the electrical system, which is our nervous system, can't function, then we have the chemical functions of the endocrine system. So this will control and regulate body systems, and it helps to maintain long-term control or homeostasis. So, in our fight or flight, if we're involved in a car wreck, for example, our nervous system is going to be the initial system that comes in and tries to maintain homeostasis, and it maintains the balance. In long term, that's when the endocrine system will kick in and try to help support what was taking place in the nervous system. We also have the cardiovascular system, so it not only includes the heart, but also the vasculature. You have that exchange and transport of materials. The lymphatic system is kind of our trash team. They're the ones that pick up all the junk. They maintain our immunity and our fluid balance as well. We have our respiratory system, which is involved in gas exchange. Also helps with our acid-base balance. We're going to spend some time on that. And we have the digestive system. Now, this is where we have the bringing in of food. We're breaking it down and we're absorbing those nutrients, and then we're eliminating the things we don't need or waste products. And then we have the urinary system, which is the excretion of waste in the form of fluids. This is where we maintain our fluid and electrolyte balance, also including our acid-base balance. We're going to talk about that from the metabolic standpoint in future lectures. And of course, we have the reproductive system. That's what allows us to continue to exist on this planet. But why? What is the end goal of these building blocks and organ systems? The whole point is that we're trying to maintain homeostasis. We're trying to maintain a happy balance. And we do that with this homeostasis feedback. And there's a negative and positive feedback, and we're going to talk about those and and hopefully this slide will help with that. So if we were to, let me get my laser pointer out here. So let's say that the temperature gets hot, or we get hot. That is going to trigger the temperature in our body to go up, and our body is going to sweat to try to reduce that heat. That's part of that negative feedback. So we're getting hot and we're opposing the stimulus. That's what they mean by negative feedback. They're opposing the stimulus. Same thing over here. If we get too super cold, if we cool off too much and we get cold, then our body is going to oppose that and try to warm up by shivering. So that is also considered a negative feedback. So think about it in your house. You have the temperature gauge on the wall. When the temperature reaches, if you set your temperature gauge to 68 for the air conditioner to kick on at 68, and the temperature in the house goes to 69 or even 70, that gauge on the wall is going to say, nope, you're getting too hot, and it's going to turn the air conditioner on to reduce it and bring it back down to normal. Once that temperature in the room gets down to the 68, then your air conditioner is going to cut off. It's opposing the stimulus, so it's giving you that negative feedback. On the flip side to this, you have what's referred to as a positive feedback. The positive feedback mechanism, and the best and the most relatable example that you'll ever see with anything with paramedic education at all, is going to be the concept of labor and delivery. So as the baby gets to the point where they're taking up too much space, you have these stretch receptors that are going to be triggered. That goes to the brain and tells the brain to release oxytocin. That oxytocin will start the contraction of the uterus. Now, we know that contractions get closer and closer together. They go from being 10 minutes apart to 5 minutes apart to 2 minutes apart. Baby's coming. That trigger is going to trigger more and more of those contractions. So that's considered a positive feedback because we're enhancing that stimulus each time. And anytime you have an injury or an illness, this can interfere with our balance. So it's really up to our bodies to try to maintain homeostasis. And we're going to spend time looking at that later on. And then we're just going to go back through and hit those anatomical terms. So you have those directional terms such as superior, posterior, anterior, proximal, distal, and inferior. Take a few minutes to review those on your own. You will definitely see them again. Also, we look at the anatomical position, which is where you're facing forward in upright position. Your eyes are straight ahead, your arms are hanging by their side, palms are facing forward, and the feet are together. And then we can divide the body into planes. You have frontal, sagittal, mid-sagittal, transverse, all of those different planes. Just take a few minutes to review that information in your textbook. And our body positions. So we are pretty familiar with this. You've got the lateral recumbent position where we're putting them on their side. We're laying them prone. So the politically correct way for this one was if you're laying prone, if you're laying face down, then you are prone to an attack because you cannot defend yourself. Whereas you're laying supine on the spine, you're laying on the spine, then you're able to defend yourself. And of course, you've got seating, seating, whatever, you get my point. And we do have to kind of mention the body cavities. A lot of people don't think about the body cavities. So we'll kind of point out a few of these here. You've got your cranial cavity, which includes the brain, the cavity that houses the brain and the spinal cord. You have the thoracic cavity, which actually houses the lungs, and you have the mediastinum, which is in between those two, the pleural cavities here. The mediastinum contains the heart and the great vessels. You have the dividing point, which is the diaphragm that breaks you from the thoracic cavity into the abdominal cavity. And then you can even divide the abdominal cavity even further into both the abdominal and then the pelvic cavity, or the abdominopelvic cavity. If you really want to get technical about this, and this side view is a little bit easier to understand, you're going from the top of the sacrum here, so where you have that where your lumbar spine ends and your sacrum begins, and it connects down in the front at the pubis symphysis. And I also like this picture because it gives you a really good representation, shows you those different tissues, those sheets of mesentery that hold or suspend your intestines within the body system, keeps them from all jumbling up down here at the bottom. It kind of keeps them suspended. And you'll be able to see also that you have your peritoneum and you have a retroperitoneal space. It's everything that lies behind the peritoneum. So those are very important. We will definitely hit those many times over. And you'll need to know which organs lie in the retroperitoneal space. Finally, you have the spinal cord. You can kind of check this out. The one thing that I like to point out to everybody, in the spinal cords, the vertebrae, the spinal vertebrae, is that you have 7 cervical vertebrae, you have 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and then of course you've got the fused coccygeal, which is about 3. The one thing I like to point out here is that you have 7 cervical vertebrae, but in reality, the funny part is you have 8 cervical nerves. So that's just a little side note for you for later. So I really do like this picture. If you have trouble kind of understanding or relating the information, if you can take a look, you've got the lung tissue, and each lung sits within its own pleural cavity. In between those, you have this area that's known as the mediastinum, okay? And the heart sits within its own cavity, which is called the pericardial cavity. Peri means around, cardial having to do with the heart. So you have those cavities. And I always like to remind everybody that you can approach this from a couple different standpoints. Everybody in EMT class is taught about the quadrants and how you can locate the information within each quadrant, your organs. But you also have the 9 regions, and sometimes you'll hear mention of the 9 regions, and this is just a good representation to kind of keep you on the right page with that. This is about the end of the slideshow for this one. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, just a quick review of systems that you've already been introduced to in the past. Have a great day.